The massive council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of alien delegates filled their seats. The air itself seemed thick with worry and confusion. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Kieran, his blue-scaled skin glistening under the bright lights. His four muscular arms moved as he spoke, pointing at the giant floating screen that showed numbers nobody wanted to believe. "Look at these numbers," Kieran said, his deep voice echoing through the huge room. 847 battles, 847 wins, not even one single loss. He paused, letting the shocking truth sink in. 300 years of fighting across the galaxy, and humans have never been defeated. Not once. The delegates started whispering to each other in dozens of different languages. Some made clicking sounds, others hummed low melodies, and a few released puffs of colored gas that served as their way of talking. But they all shared the same feeling, complete amazement mixed with growing fear. Elder Thane sat in the front row in his special, crystal chair that sparkled like diamonds. His people, the Kelthani, were older than most civilizations in the galaxy. They had watched entire empires rise up like mighty mountains, only to crumble into dust over thousands of years, but even they had never seen anything like humanity's perfect record. "Maybe humans just have better weapons than us," suggested Ambassador Vera, though even she didn't sound convinced by her own words. Her green tentacles twisted nervously as she spoke. "Their technology must be far ahead of ours." Kieran shook his head slowly, his expression growing darker. "That's what we thought too. So we studied their equipment, their ships, their weapons. You know what we found?" He gestured to another screen showing images of human spacecraft. "Their ships are old. Really old. Some of them are held together with metal patches and prayer. Their weapons, basic energy blasters that most of us stopped using 50 years ago." The room erupted in confused chatter. If humans didn't have superior technology, how could they possibly maintain such an impossible winning streak? "But that makes no sense," called out Ambassador Jorik from the back of the room. His rock-like appearance made him look like a living mountain. "We've all seen the battle reports. Humans often start fights outnumbered 2-1, sometimes 3-1. They should be losing these battles easily." Kieran nodded grimly. "Exactly. On paper, humans should have lost hundreds of conflicts. In the Battle of Kepler Prime, they were down to 12 ships against 60 enemy vessels. According to every computer simulation we ran, they had less than a 1% chance of victory." He paused dramatically. "They won. Completely. Not a single enemy ship escaped." The chamber fell dead silent. You could hear the gentle hum of the air recycling systems and the soft glow of the holographic displays, but not a single voice spoke. The weight of this impossible reality pressed down on everyone present. Elder Thane's ancient voice finally cut through the silence like a knife through silk. "My people have stories," he said slowly, his words carrying the weight of thousands of years. "Old stories passed down from generation to generation. We call them the Persistence Hunter legends." Every eye in the room turned to focus on the elderly crystal being. His body pulsed with soft blue light as he continued speaking. "These stories tell of creatures that never give up, never stop hunting, never accept defeat. They chase their prey across continents, across star systems if necessary. Other predators kill quickly or give up and find easier targets. But persistence hunters, they follow their prey until the prey simply collapses from exhaustion." Thane's light grew brighter. "We always thought these were just scary stories to tell young ones, myths, fantasy." Ambassador Kieran felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warm temperature in the chamber. "Are you suggesting that humans are these persistence hunters from your legends?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Thane replied carefully. "I'm just saying that maybe our ancestors knew something we forgot." The implications hung in the air like a dark cloud. If humans really were some kind of persistence hunters, it would explain their impossible military record. But it also raised terrifying questions about what kind of species the galaxy had been dealing with. "We need answers," declared Ambassador Vera, her tentacles now completely still with determination. "Real answers, not theories or ancient stories." "Agreed," said Kieran. I propose we launch a full investigation into human military methods. We need to study their tactics, their strategies, their way of thinking about war itself. And if we don't like what we find, asked someone from the crowd. Kieran's forearms spread wide in a gesture of uncertainty. Then at least we'll know what we're really dealing with. The vote was quick and unanimous. Every single delegate agreed to support a comprehensive study of human warfare. They needed to understand how a species with average technology and often inferior numbers could maintain a perfect military record for 3 centuries. As the council session ended and delegates began filing out, Elder Thane remained in his crystal seat, lost in thought. The old stories his people told weren't just about hunting animals. They were about something far more frightening. Intelligent persistence hunters who never stopped, never gave up, and never showed mercy to their prey. The investigation would begin immediately, but Thane already suspected what they would find, and it terrified him. Dr. Minji stood in the center of the research facility, surrounded by the most advanced holographic displays the galaxy had ever seen. She was known throughout the universe as the best military historian alive, someone who could look at any battle and explain exactly why one side won and the other lost. But today she faced a puzzle that challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare. The facility itself was built on Kepler 442b, a planet that belonged to no one and everyone at the same time. It was the perfect neutral ground for this kind of sensitive research. The building was underground, protected by energy shields and surrounded by enough security to keep entire armies away. Inside, representatives from 7 different alien species worked together, all trying to solve the same impossible mystery. "All right, everyone, gather around," Dr. Minji called out to her team. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades studying the art of war. "We're going to start with what I consider the most interesting case, the Terran-Zephyrian border war." Commander Juan, her primary assistant, moved to the main display console. He was a tall, lean alien with silver skin that reflected the room's lights. As a former officer in the Zephyrian Navy, he had actually fought against humans in that very war. The experience had left him with a healthy respect for human military capabilities, though he still didn't understand how they had won. "The numbers don't lie," Juan said as he brought up the battle data. "At the start of the final engagement, humans had 27 ships left. We had 81. Their ships were smaller, older, and many were already damaged from previous battles." He paused, his silver skin darkening slightly, a sign of confusion in his species. "Every computer model we ran said human defeat was guaranteed. Not likely. Guaranteed." Dr. Minji nodded as she studied the holographic display that showed the positions of both fleets. "What were the human casualties at this point?" 53% of their original fleet was already destroyed or disabled, answered Dr. Yuki, a researcher from the Andorian Collective. Her 4 eyes allowed her to process visual data faster than most species. They had lost more ships in the previous week than most civilizations lose in entire wars. "So they should have surrendered," observed Commander Taro, representing the Helix Federation. His people were known for their logical approach to everything, including warfare. Any rational military commander would have called for retreat or begun negotiating terms of surrender. Dr. Minji smiled grimly. "That's exactly what makes this so interesting. Let's watch what actually happened." The holographic display came to life, showing a 3-dimensional recreation of the battle. The human ships appeared as small blue dots, while the Zephyrian fleet showed up as larger red triangles. At first, everything looked normal. The 2 fleets approached each other in standard battle formations. "Here's where it gets strange," Commander Juan said, his voice growing quieter. "Watch the human ships in the next few minutes." As the battle began, the human ships did something that defied all military logic. Instead of trying to maintain distance and use their long-range weapons, they charged straight toward the Zephyrian fleet. Even more shocking, the ships that were already damaged and barely holding together led the charge. "Look at ship designation H47, Dr. Minji pointed to one of the blue dots. According to the sensor data, it had lost 40% of its hull integrity. Life support was failing. The engine was running at 60% capacity. She paused. Any normal crew would have evacuated to other ships or surrendered. The display showed H-47 accelerating directly toward the largest Zephyrian vessel, completely ignoring the weapons fire that was tearing it apart piece by piece. "I remember this moment," Commander Juan said quietly. "We tried to contact that ship to offer them a chance to surrender. You know what the human captain said?" The room fell silent as everyone waited for the answer. He said, "Surrender is not in our vocabulary today." Then he cut communications and kept coming. Dr. Yuki's four eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not military strategy, that's madness." "Wait, it gets worse," Dr. Minji said, as she highlighted another part of the display. "Here's the communication log from the human flagship." A crackling audio transmission filled the room. Through the static and background noise of battle, they could hear the human captain's voice, calm and steady despite the chaos around him. "Flagship to all vessels. We're going to ram their command ship. Anyone who can't keep up, provide covering fire. Anyone who can keep up, follow us in. Today we show them what humans do when we're cornered." Commander Taro's logical mind struggled to process this information. But that's suicide. Even if they succeeded in destroying the Zephyrian flagship, they would lose most of their remaining ships. "That's exactly what they did," Commander Juan confirmed. "Ship after ship, they kept coming. Even when their hulls were cracking open and their crews were dying, they kept attacking. We couldn't understand it. Our ships were stronger, our weapons were better, but our crews—" He trailed off. "What about your crews?" Dr. Minji asked gently. "Our crews started to panic," Juan admitted. "We're trained to fight enemies who behave rationally, who value their lives, who will retreat when the situation becomes hopeless. But humans, they seemed to get more dangerous the more desperate their situation became." The holographic display showed the final moments of the battle. Human ships, many of them barely holding together, smashed into Zephyrian vessels like guided missiles. The damage to both fleets was enormous, but something incredible happened in those final moments. The Zephyrian fleet retreated, Dr. Minji announced. Despite having superior numbers and firepower, they withdrew from the battlefield. "We couldn't take it anymore," Commander Juan explained. "Fighting humans wasn't like fighting any other species. It was like fighting against death itself. They seemed to welcome destruction if it meant hurting us. Our admirals realized that even if we won, we might lose so many ships that we'd be defenseless against other enemies." Dr. Yuki was reviewing the psychological profiles of both species. Zephyrian military doctrine emphasizes preservation of forces and calculated risks. Human military doctrine appears to emphasize— She paused, searching for the right words. "Victory at any cost." Dr. Minji finished. "Literally any cost." As the team continued to analyze the data, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. This wasn't an isolated incident. In battle after battle, humans displayed the same willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. They didn't just fight to win, they fought as if losing was literally worse than death. Commander Taro, still struggling with the illogical nature of human tactics, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. How do you defeat an enemy that considers total destruction preferable to surrender? Dr. Minji looked around at her team of researchers, each representing a different species with their own military traditions and logical approaches to warfare. "I don't think you do," she said quietly. "I think that's exactly the point." The investigation was just beginning, but already they were uncovering something that challenged the very foundation of how civilized species conducted warfare. Humans didn't just fight differently. They seemed to operate under completely different rules about what was acceptable in pursuit of victory. 3 months had passed since Dr. Minji's team began their investigation, and the research facility on Kepler 442b had become a place of growing unease. The walls were lined with screens showing battle footage, interview recordings, and psychological profiles that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human warfare. What started as scientific curiosity had transformed into something closer to horror as the team uncovered the truth about humanity's perfect military record. The interview room was dimly lit, designed to make subjects feel comfortable and willing to share their experiences. But comfort seemed impossible for the alien sitting across from Dr. Minji. Garam, a former commander in the Hegemony fleet, hadn't been the same since his encounter with human forces 2 years earlier. His once proud military bearing had been replaced by nervous glances and trembling hands. "Tell me about the Battle of Rigel 7, Dr. Minji said gently, her voice carefully neutral to avoid triggering any traumatic memories. Garam's breathing became shallow as he recalled the events. "We outnumbered them 4-1. Our ships were newer, our weapons more advanced. It should have been a simple victory." He paused, his alien features contorting with remembered fear. "But they didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like they were already dead and just hadn't realized it yet." Dr. Minji leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean by that?" "Normal soldiers try to stay alive while completing their mission," Garam explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "They take cover. They retreat when necessary. They value their own lives. But humans—" He shook his head. "Humans acted like their lives meant nothing compared to their objective. They would charge into our heaviest fire without hesitation. When their ships were crippled, instead of evacuating, they would ram them into our vessels." This wasn't the first time Dr. Minji had heard such testimony. Over the past 3 months, her team had interviewed 47 former prisoners of war from 12 different species. The stories were remarkably consistent and consistently terrifying. After the interview, Dr. Minji returned to the main research chamber, where her team was analyzing footage from the siege of Proxima Station. This particular battle had become legendary throughout the galaxy, not for its strategic importance, but for the sheer impossibility of what the human defenders had accomplished. "Show me the timeline again," Dr. Minji requested as she took her seat. Commander Juan brought up the holographic display. Day 1. Proxima Station comes under siege by a combined fleet of 68 ships. The human defenders have 12 vessels and the station itself. Day 15. Human supply lines are cut. Day 37. All human reinforcements are destroyed. En route. Day 62. The station's main power grid fails. Dr. Yuki, who had been studying the psychological aspects of the siege, added her observations. By day 62, any rational military force would have surrendered. The humans were completely cut off, running out of food, water, and ammunition. Their situation was hopeless. "But they didn't surrender," Dr. Minji noted. "Not only did they not surrender," Commander Juan continued, "they actually increased their resistance. When their regular weapons ran out, they started using pieces of debris as projectiles. When their targeting systems failed, they aimed manually. When the lights went out, they fought in complete darkness." The most disturbing part came next. Dr. Minji activated an audio recording from day 187 of the siege. The quality was poor, filled with static and the sounds of battle, but human voices could be clearly heard in the background. They were singing, not screaming, not crying, not begging for mercy. They were singing old songs from their homeworld as they prepared for what their own computers had calculated as a hopeless final assault. The melody was haunting, beautiful even, but the context made it deeply unsettling. "Listen to the lyrics," Dr. Yunji said softly. She had been Dr. Minji's research partner for over a decade, specializing in psychological warfare analysis. They're not singing about victory or glory. They're singing about dying well, about making their sacrifice meaningful. The recording continued, and the alien researchers could hear human commanders giving final orders. There was no panic in their voices, no desperation, just calm determination as they prepared to throw themselves at an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. "This is Commander Jisoo to all stations," came a clear human voice through the static. "We're down to our last. Power cells and emergency rations. The enemy expects us to surrender in the next few hours." There was a pause, then something that chilled the alien listeners to their core. "So let's give them something they'll never forget instead." What followed was a coordinated assault that defied every principle of military logic. Human defenders used improvised explosives, makeshift weapons, and their own bodies as weapons. They turned their dying space station into a giant booby trap, rigging every corridor and room with surprises for the attacking forces. The siege ended on day 193, Commander Juan reported. The attacking fleet withdrew voluntarily. Dr. Minji paused the recording. They withdrew, even though they were winning? That's the most disturbing part, Dr. Yunji said as she pulled up the psychological profiles of the attacking force. The enemy commanders reported that their troops were suffering from severe morale problems. They couldn't understand why the humans kept fighting when defeat was certain. It was affecting their own soldiers' willingness to continue the battle. The research team had discovered something that challenged the very foundation of how galactic civilizations understood warfare. Most species fought to achieve specific objectives: territory, resources, political goals. When those objectives became impossible to achieve, rational military forces would negotiate, retreat, or surrender to minimize casualties. But humans seem to operate under completely different rules. "Look at this classified report," Dr. Yunji said, bringing up a document that had been sealed by 3 different military organizations. It describes an incident where human crews manually overrode their ship's safety protocols to detonate their nuclear reactors. They turned their own vessels into massive bombs, taking entire enemy formations with them. The phrase that appeared most frequently in human military documents was acceptable losses. But when the research team analyzed what humans considered acceptable, they found something that terrified them. For most species, acceptable losses meant losing 5 to 10% of their forces. For humans, acceptable losses could mean 100% if the mission was important enough. Other species fight to win, Dr. Yunji concluded after reviewing hundreds of battle reports. Humans fight until their enemies surrender out of exhaustion and psychological trauma. They don't just defeat their opponents militarily, they break them mentally. Dr. Minji looked around at her team of researchers. Each represented a different species, a different military tradition, a different way of thinking about warfare. But they all shared the same expression of growing horror as they realized what they were dealing with. "Are we saying that humans have never lost a war because they're willing to sacrifice everything?" asked Commander Taro, his logical mind struggling to process the implications. "I think we're saying something worse than that," Dr. Minji replied quietly. "I think we're saying that humans don't see total sacrifice as a loss. They see it as another form of victory. The investigation was revealing that humanity's perfect military record wasn't due to superior technology or brilliant strategy. It was due to something far more fundamental and terrifying. A species that had weaponized their own willingness to die for their beliefs." As the research continued, one question haunted every member of the team. How do you defeat an enemy that considers death preferable to surrender? 6 months of investigation had transformed the research facility from a place of scientific inquiry into something resembling a psychological treatment center. Dr. Minji's team worked in shifts now, as prolonged exposure to human military philosophy had begun affecting their mental health. The alien researchers found themselves experiencing nightmares about endless human soldiers who kept fighting even after death, their voices echoing with strange songs and impossible determination. The breakthrough came when Dr. Yunji cracked the encryption on a massive database of human military communications. Thousands upon thousands of messages, orders, and personal recordings that revealed the true nature of human warfare. What she discovered was so disturbing that she requested a special interim session with the Galactic Council to present her findings immediately. The council chamber was smaller this time, with only the most senior representatives present. Dr. Hyunji stood before them, her normally composed demeanor replaced by visible exhaustion and something approaching fear. "We've been looking at this wrong from the beginning," she announced without preamble. "We assumed humans fight for the same reasons we do: territory, resources, strategic advantage, but that's not true." She activated the holographic display, showing samples of decoded human communications. They fight for concepts, abstract ideas that have no physical form. They call them freedom, justice, honor, and duty. These aren't territories they can occupy or resources they can harvest. They're beliefs. Ambassador Kiran shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "All species have beliefs, that's not unusual. But do you die for your beliefs?" Dr. Yunji asked pointedly. "Would you sacrifice your entire civilization for an abstract concept?" The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Unji continued her presentation, displaying a series of human military communications that her team had painstakingly translated. Listen to this message from a human soldier named Lieutenant Doyun, recorded just before a hopeless assault on a fortified enemy position. The audio was crystal clear despite being transmitted across light years of space. A young human voice, calm and steady, spoke into his personal recorder. "Mom, Dad, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it home. I want you to know that what we're doing here matters. The enemy thinks they can enslave an entire planet just because they have bigger guns. But they're wrong. Some things are worth more than living. Today we show them that freedom isn't something you can take away by force." The recording ended, and Dr. Yunji provided the context. Lieutenant Doyun died 30 minutes after making this recording. He and his unit charged a position that was mathematically impossible to take. They knew they would die. They did it anyway. Commander Huan, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "During our conflict with humans, we intercepted similar communications. We thought they were propaganda, designed to boost morale. We were wrong." He stood up, his silver skin reflecting the chamber's lights as he recalled his own experiences. They were genuine. Human soldiers really believed that dying for their cause was preferable to living without it. We calculated acceptable losses. At 12% of our forces, we considered that reasonable for achieving important objectives. Dr. Yunji nodded grimly. "We found human military doctrine that calculates acceptable losses at 100% if necessary. They have entire battle plans based on the assumption that everyone involved will die." The alien delegates exchanged horrified glances. The concept was so foreign to their way of thinking that many struggled to comprehend it. "But surely they must have some limit," suggested Ambassador Vera. "Some point where they recognize that continuing to fight is pointless." Dr. Minji, who had been quietly observing the session, stepped forward. "That's the most disturbing part of our investigation. We found no evidence of any such limit. In fact, we discovered something even worse." She activated another display showing human military terminology and definitions. Humans have never actually lost a war because the concept of defeat doesn't exist in their military philosophy. They have terms like strategic withdrawal and tactical repositioning, but no word for surrender that doesn't involve the complete extinction of their species. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Elder Thane's crystalline form pulsed with agitation as he processed this information. "Are you telling us," he said slowly, "that humans literally cannot conceive of defeat?" "That's exactly what we're telling you," Dr. Minji confirmed. "We analyzed their language, their military manuals, their historical records. Surrender to humans means the death of everything they hold dear. So they've convinced themselves that physical death is preferable." Dr. Yunji brought up another set of recordings, these from human pilots who had deliberately crashed their damaged fighters into enemy capital ships. Listen to what they were broadcasting as they died. Ancient human songs filled the chamber, melodies that spoke of sacrifice and glory and dying for something greater than oneself. The pilots sang as they guided their doomed craft into enemy vessels, their voices growing fainter as their ships disintegrated around them. "They're not screaming," observed Ambassador Kiran with horror. "They're celebrating. Because to them this isn't defeat," Dr. Yunji explained. "This is victory. They've denied their enemy the satisfaction of their surrender. They've proven that their beliefs are stronger than their fear of death." Commander Huan shared his personal perspective from the other side of human warfare. "We thought we were fighting soldiers, but soldiers can be defeated, demoralized, convinced to give up. Humans aren't soldiers in any way we understand. They're something else entirely." The research team had discovered communications from human commanders explaining their philosophy to confused alien prisoners. One recording stood out among the rest, a human general named Colonel Minho speaking to captured enemy officers. "You keep asking why we don't surrender when the situation is hopeless. But you're missing the point. The situation is never hopeless as long as we're still breathing. Every minute we resist is a minute your people have to think about what they're doing. Every casualty you take is a reminder that freedom isn't free. Even if you kill every last one of us, you'll remember this fight for the rest of your lives. And maybe, just maybe, that memory will make you think twice before you try to enslave someone else. The recording ended, and the chamber remained silent for a long moment. "They've weaponized their own extinction," Dr. Minji concluded. "They've convinced themselves that some things are worth dying for, and they've convinced their enemies that those same things are worth living in fear of." Ambassador Vera raised a trembling tentacle. "What kind of species does that? What kind of evolution produces beings who value abstract concepts more than their own survival?" "A species that has never been truly defeated," Elder Thane said quietly. "A species that has never learned that sometimes surrender is the wiser choice." The implications were staggering. The galaxy had been dealing with a species that viewed total annihilation as just another form of victory. Every conflict with humans carried the risk of fighting an enemy that became more dangerous the closer they came to defeat. "So what do we do with this information?" asked Ambassador Kiran. Dr. Minji looked around at the assembled representatives, each representing civilizations that had survived for thousands of years through careful diplomacy and rational decision-making. "We make sure we never have to find out what happens when you push humans too far," she said simply. "Because based on everything we've learned, they'd rather burn the galaxy down than let anyone take away what they believe in." The session ended with a unanimous vote to classify the findings and begin immediate diplomatic initiatives to ensure that humanity's belief systems were never challenged by galactic powers again. The Grand Council chamber had never seen anything like this before. For over 1,000 years, representatives from across the galaxy had gathered in this massive hall to discuss trade disputes, territorial boundaries, and diplomatic solutions to conflicts. But today, the atmosphere was different. Today, fear hung in the air like a thick fog that everyone could feel, but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Dr. Minji walked slowly to the center podium, carrying with her a data pad that contained 6 months of research. But this wasn't just any research report. This was a document that would fundamentally change how every civilization in the galaxy viewed humanity. The 1,000 pages of analysis, interviews, battle footage, and psychological profiles told a story so disturbing that several council members had requested additional security before the session began. Representatives from 47 different species filled the chamber. Some sat in traditional chairs, others floated in energy fields, and a few existed as pure consciousness within crystalline containers. Despite their vast differences, they all shared one thing in common. They were about to learn something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "Distinguished members of the Galactic Council," Dr. Minji began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustic system. "After 6 months of intensive investigation, we have reached a conclusion about humanity's perfect military record. The answer is both simpler and more terrifying than we could have imagined." She paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces, tentacles, crystalline forms, and energy beings that represented the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. "Humans have never lost a galactic war because they have never fought a war. What we call military conflicts, they call existential crusades. To humans, victory and death are not opposite outcomes. They are equally acceptable ways to achieve their goals." The chamber immediately erupted in confused chatter. Delegates spoke in dozens of languages, creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, harmonics, and electromagnetic pulses. But underneath all the noise, Dr. Minji could sense something else: fear. Elder Thane's ancient crystalline form began pulsing with a deep red light, something that hadn't happened in living memory. The eldest being in the galaxy, he had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. But even he had never encountered anything like what Dr. Minji was describing. "Let me be absolutely clear about what this means," Dr. Minji continued as the noise died down. "When humans enter a conflict, they are not trying to win a battle or capture territory or achieve some strategic objective. They are fighting for the very survival of their core beliefs, and they would rather die than see those beliefs destroyed." Ambassador Kiran slowly rose from his seat, his forearms trembling slightly. As someone who had spent decades negotiating with human diplomats, he thought he understood them. Now he realized he had been talking to representatives of a species that was fundamentally different from anything else in the known universe. "Dr. Minji," he said, his voice carefully controlled, Are you telling this council that we have been negotiating with a species that would rather destroy the entire galaxy than accept defeat? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Every representative in the chamber leaned forward, waiting for an answer that they both needed to hear, and desperately hoped would not confirm their worst fears. Dr. Minji looked directly at Ambassador Kiran, her expression grave. I'm saying that we have been fortunate that humans have only wanted reasonable things so far, but if we ever push them to a point where they believe their core values are threatened, then yes, they would choose mutual destruction over surrender. The silence that followed was deafening. For several long minutes, the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in stunned quiet, trying to process the implications of what they had just learned. Elder Thane finally broke the silence, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber like wind through dead leaves. The old stories were true, he whispered, though his words were amplified for everyone to hear. The persistence hunters were never myths, they were warnings. Dr. Minji activated her holographic display one final time, showing a summary of humanity's military philosophy. Our recommendation to this council is simple and absolute. Never engage humans in military conflict under any circumstances. They are not rational actors in the way we understand rationality. They are a species that has weaponized their own extinction instinct. The display showed statistics that chilled the assembled delegates to their cause. Human military doctrine included detailed plans for scenarios where 100% casualties were considered acceptable outcomes. They had strategies for fighting even when completely surrounded, outnumbered and facing certain death. Most disturbing of all, they had multiple historical examples of choosing death over surrender, and they celebrated these choices as their greatest victories. Ambassador. Vera from the Nexus Coalition raised a trembling tentacle. What about their civilian population? Surely they don't all share this suicidal philosophy. That's perhaps the most frightening aspect of our findings, Dr. Minji replied. The military mindset isn't separate from civilian society. It's woven into their culture, their history, their very identity as a species. Human children learn songs about dying heroically for their beliefs. Their greatest heroes are often people who chose death over compromise. Commander Juan, who had participated in the research and fought against humans personally, stood to address the council. I have seen human farmers take up weapons and fight trained soldiers to protect their homes. I have seen human merchants ram their cargo ships into military vessels when their colonies were threatened. This isn't just their military. This is their entire species. The weight of this revelation settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were realizing that they had been sharing space with a species of fanatics who disguised their extremism behind polite diplomacy and reasonable negotiations. So what do we do? Asked a delegate from the Outer Rim territories. How do we coexist with a species like this? Dr. Minji had anticipated this question. We give them whatever they want, within reason. We make sure their core values are never threatened. And we pray that their definition of reasonable continues to align with galactic stability. The vote that followed was unlike any in galactic history. Usually, council decisions required days of debate, careful consideration of multiple viewpoints, and complex political maneuvering. But this vote was different. This vote was about survival. 47 species voted unanimously to approve the Terra Accords, a treaty that essentially granted humanity whatever they requested, in perpetuity, as long as they promised never to demonstrate their military philosophy against galactic powers again. The treaty was signed within 1 hour of Dr. Minji's presentation, the fastest major agreement in council history. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, many looked back at the holographic displays still showing human military statistics. They were trying to memorize the numbers, to understand the threat they had been unknowingly living alongside for centuries. Elder Thane remained in his crystalline seat long after the others had left, his form pulsing with slow, deep colors that indicated profound contemplation. His aide, a younger member of his species, approached cautiously. "Elder," the aide said softly, "what are your thoughts on this revelation?" Thane's ancient voice carried the weight of millennia as he replied, "The persistence hunters were never myths, young one. They were prophecies. We just hoped they would never find us." In the end, humanity had achieved something no other species in galactic history had ever accomplished. Without firing a single shot in this final confrontation, they had convinced every major power in the galaxy that fighting them was a form of mutual suicide, with emphasis on the mutual. The humans, for their part, would probably never fully understand what they had accomplished. To them, they had simply been honest about their values and their willingness to defend them. But to the galaxy, they had revealed themselves as something far more dangerous than any weapon or technology, a species that could not be defeated, because they had no concept of acceptable defeat. As news of the Terra Accords spread throughout the galaxy, one truth became clear: humanity had won the greatest victory in galactic history, not through conquest, but through the sheer terror of their uncompromising nature. They had become the species that others would go to any length to avoid fighting, simply because fighting them meant facing an enemy that preferred extinction to surrender. And perhaps in the end, that was the most human victory of all.